without any further ado, I'm going to ask you all to go ahead and turn off your video. And Marty and Lee, we're going to wait for people to disappear for a little bit. There they go. And now we can talk. So everybody, this is Martin Moran, and I happen to have the program from All the Rage, which is the last show that he did at the Barrow Group. This fall, that was last fall, wasn't it? That's just insane. It feels like a world and a universe ago, and in so many ways it is. But I have his bio here, and so I'm not going to read the whole bio. It's pretty extensive, very impressive. You've done a lot of stuff. He wrote a play called Theo, a wonderful play that was produced at Two River Theater. Marty and I worked together on his two original pieces, one, The Tricky Part, and one, All the Rage. Martin is easily one of the most significant collaborators and creative partners I've had ever. He feels to me like, just an intimate life partner. We've gone through so much together, and I am beyond grateful to have him here. He won a shitload of a bunch of awards, and excuse my French. And he also has written book forms of The Tricky Part and All the Rage, and if people wanted to buy those books, where would they find them?
Well, both books, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, both books are on Amazon. Of course, they were both published by Beacon Press, and the paperbacks by Random House, Vintage Anchor, but you can find them online, the Tricky Part and also All the Rage. Thanks.
Yeah, great, fantastic. And the play forms are different than the books.
And the plays are available too through Dramatist Play Services.
Yeah, excellent. So it's funny. Like we were talking earlier about what do we want to talk about today, and actually the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about had nothing to do with what we said that we would talk about, but it's something that came up for me. I've been reading in the paper and sometimes hearing online of areas in the country where people are, resistant to science. And it's brought up something for me. And I found myself thinking of one of the lines in All the Rage when you talk about Siba. And this is a character in the play who's based on a real person from your life, and who had experienced torture. And he was in his, I guess, I don't know what you would call them, were they sort of therapy sessions upon his arrival that you were translating for? Is that what that was?
Well, they were when you're an asylum seeker, Seth's referring to the folks I have worked with who are seeking asylum in the United States. And because I speak French, I would help with their asylum cases. And each asylee has to have an interview with a medical doctor and also a psychologist or psychiatrist. And it's part of building their case for their story of what happened to them in the United States, deciding whether they can be given asylum or not. Yeah, and so but they seem like therapy sessions in a way.
Right. Well, you're right. And in the play, you have written, some of the dialogue from one of those sessions, and there's at one point you talk about how the greatest pain that he went through and throughout all this torture and everything was his suffering about not being believed.
Yeah.
And I found myself thinking of today of, I find myself, it's not myself, but I find myself when people are not believing science, I find it particularly disturbing. And I don't know why I thought of that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that bit of writing and how much it speaks to me, in different ways now.
Yeah, in this, it is really interesting. I'm no expert on any of this, obviously, but I'm sure all of us are realizing that when we hear Anthony Fauci or Governor Cuomo speaking from the point of view of scientists and having respect for those people, it's very grounding, in my experience. But clearly, I guess what's so disturbing is that the notion of scientists or experts or people trained, uh, the seeds having been sown that they are people to be doubted and that they are elite or expert or dangerous somehow to real life or to, and it's a point of view that is not new. Obviously, it happens. It happens. I don't know. It seems to be part of a kind of degradation of knowledge and facts and how anyone who's trying to swirl up instinctual sort of reptilian, not to be but that the sort of animal in us that deals with fear.
Yeah.
And I think that when you're referring to Seba in All the Rage, what he was saying, I am not a rebel soldier. He was telling them the truth, which was his fact, his, and it was interesting that he would talk about being hit and tortured and pain. But what struck me was when he said what was most painful was not being believed by his fellow countrymen.
Yeah.
And that it was just, it was this insurmountable mystery and pain. And in that way, I can sort of see what you're talking about. And I just spent the last hour before joining you guys, and I'm so touched. I feel so, like the best part of my day, seeing your face, Seth, and seeing all your faces when you first came on. This odd way of being together is so moving. And I just realizing I'm feeling very grateful and grounded that we're connecting this way, and it'll be nice to see your faces and hear your voices in a minute. But I just spent the last hour, I want to say, reading a profile of Anthony Fauci in the New Yorker. And it was really moving as well, because he really was someone who grew tremendously during the AIDS epidemic as well, where his whole way of treating science and the rigors of what was happening in reality with AIDS, where he really grew as a person and as a scientist and doctor. And anyway, it's very moving that I just happened to be reading that. And if anyone, he's quite a character in our lives right now, a grounding person who's in the middle of the political maelstrom, but speaking with facts and science, which is so immediately grounding to so many of us.
For sure. Anyway, we've you and I have worked together so much, and I'm wondering if you felt comfortable talking about our working process and your working process. You have, you found a way to create these, what I believe to be brilliant and inspired pieces of work. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the way in which these pieces have been developed and how that shows up for you in other creative processes, how it shows up for you as you move through the world. Any words of wisdom you have. So many of the people listening to this interview and participating in our session today are writers and actors and they're all creating their own pieces, and I'm wondering what, just any thoughts you have on that.
Yeah. Well, some of you I've talked with a lot about this storytelling, Candace and some of you other writers and actors, and I recognize so many of you as that ache, that impulse, that feeling inside of that something is knocking to be shared with the world, essentially. The word that comes to mind so often for me is the mystery, just the absolute mystery of it. When I was first writing, it felt extremely private and extremely dangerous and extremely secretive, because I was trying to write about deeply personal mysteries about my own growing up and sexuality and um, my religion, my faith of growing up Catholic, and how that felt so beautiful and so destructive at once. And I kept, all the while, I felt like I was wrangling with these paradoxes all the time in a very quiet, secret way. And the thing that I guess I couldn't understand was that I felt such a kind of imperative, like I had to try to understand these, not just one story, but these stories, these strands of stories in my being. You know, there's this poet who always used to say, you know, as human beings, we're not so much made of molecules as we're made of stories. We're made up of stories. And this sense that there were these stories within that somehow were asking to come out, first very privately, but then this feeling arose that the way the story becomes full and complete is by sharing it, connecting, and no matter how frightening or full of doubt, which the doubt never went away, that what do I have to say, or what would, but part of the mystery was that it just kept happening and I kept writing. And Seth, an enormous part of the mystery is that there came a certain time when you and I, almost by chance, I said to you, you know, I've been writing this stuff, it's very personal, and someone's asked me to read some of it at a festival. Would you listen? And at that point, maybe some of you know about this or heard it, but Seth said, oh, I really think this should be a piece of theater in some way. And I was utterly ashamed and terrified. And I said, no, no, no. If anything else, it's really just meant to be on the page because I don't want to be there to tell the story. But slowly, I guess part of what I'm saying, and there's so many aspects of this, but that whatever that mysterious ache is within you, that to honor it somehow, even a little bit every day, in writing or in sharing with a group of friends or a few people, that it's how important it is as medicine for the world. And to honor it is important. And I am the first to acknowledge that I was graced by the tremendous gift and privilege that the Barrow Group existed, and that Seth, as a very objective craftsman and fellow spirit and guide, joined with me to really hold a space for these stories to find a way to emerge into the world. And I think that to me is a huge part of the mystery, that somehow the trust of that we were meant to somehow collaborate. And I think in your own work, speaking to all of you, to be on the lookout for trusting that the right souls and the right moments will arrive for your story to move into the world as the medicine that it is, because it's meant to, and because it's actually not your story. It's consciousness, and it's the human impulse to connect and get to the bottom of love and the mystery of being here on earth. And may you have the blessing and honor to meet a collaborator as amazing and selfless and extraordinary as Seth.
Well, whatever.
I mean, that's what comes out.
There was something that you said that just reminded me of something, that I was working with some writers last night, and one of the things that comes up frequently when people are working stuff is how does something take shape? In other words, people are writing something,
Mm-hmm.
And I always talk about and think about stories as things that are sort of naturally constructed to, they start somewhere and eventually they get to something. Something happens. They get to some sort of main event or landing point or climax or whatever you want to call it, that starts to feel like this is why we're here. Everything else,
Mm-hmm.
everything here was just sort of to help
Mm-hmm.
guide you to this point, and then something happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that a lot of writers express that they don't necessarily, in the course of their writing, know what that point is. They
Mm-hmm.
feel lost. They feel like they're just kind of putting stuff out there, but how do these things fit together? And I'm wondering if you could share anything about your experience and your process
Mm-hmm.
as to how those things emerge and how they eventually find a shape that starts to feel like not only a story, but a manageable story, something that takes place comfortably in the course of, in the case of a performed show, in the course of, say, it could be any number, but say 80 minutes,
Yeah.
and here we are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what do you think? How does that happen?
Well, it's a profound question. Again, I want to try to be specific in some ways, but again, I want to just be honest with you that the entire time of working on it, essentially, I feel that I'm swimming in a mystery, and that to somehow, somewhere, be at least a little bit comfortable with that is important. I think there's a sense that always you're circling and circling and circling something that's unsayable or unknowable, because being in a body on earth, being in physical form, having been made of, essentially stars and meteorites and earth, and evolved into these creatures, the meaning and the mystery of being here is wild and unknowable. That being said, the great thing about a story, as you say, is that there's an event or there's a structure. To me, I never knew what the structure was until maybe the 11th hour of the 11th hour. Even then, it's not easy to articulate. But there are certain posts, certain things that I think can help guide. One, to me, is there somewhere in your gut, there is the feeling of an engine that to me has to do with a question. What happened? And that, how do I forgive? Or why is there violence? And how did I get through that? But that the inquiry is part of circling the thing that's unsayable, but the inquiry becomes an engine, and trusting that somehow the way the brain works is narratively. There is narrative built into our brain structure by our ancestors. We are natural storytellers. When you sit down to tell a joke, or you say, oh my God, you won't believe what happened to me today. I was walking down the street and out from behind the wall came, boom, you're into it. You have a narrative engine. It's built into your genes. That, along with the element of mystery, that somewhere as an artist, you're wishing to answer the deepest questions, which usually have to do with death, with I think ultimately, one way or the other, we're always, when we really get deep, we're writing in one way or another, whether we know it or not, about death, about the fact that we poof, disappear. That's the tricky part, really. Oh gosh, I know I'm being really, I want to try to be concrete.
Well, here's what I'm
Yeah.
hearing what you're saying, because this is the way I'm processing what you're saying right now. In one sense, there's this sort of engine that may be fueled by some sort of a question or quest or search for this unsayable thing. And that keeps you going and keeps you writing and keeps you creating and gets the product out there in the world. And at the same time, there's a natural ability that humans have as storytellers that exhibited by your examples, which I think are wonderful. I'm always amazed that if people are at a dinner party or something and they start in with this like, oh my God, you know, did I ever tell you about when I got malaria? And you know, boom, they're off. That somehow it naturally and quickly evolves into this very succinct, entertaining and compelling story structure. And so the idea, what I hear, this is how I process what you said, that we have this sort of built-in skill. And then we also have something that may be some sort of a deeply felt quest. And we set out on that quest, and then at some point as we write, that skill starts to set in and things start to take the shape of a story. It's like, lo and behold, there's, I mean, when I think of it in technical terms, you know, basically you start a story and pretty soon something happens that like is extraordinary and hooks you in your example, and from behind a bush, you know, I really am wondering what happened from behind that bush, but something happened that's extraordinary, and oh, we're in, and we want to know why are we being told this, and what is it, and everything, and somehow we know that it's going to land. One of the things that's, I think, interesting about writing longer pieces versus telling stories at dinner is that at dinner, my experience is that usually those stories are prompted by the memory of the landing point, the central event. In other words, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, you know, that time, that what happened when I discovered gorillas in live in Uganda. There was something very specific that happened, and for me it was like really noteworthy to me, and I want to share it. And so in order to share that, it's like, well, I got to tell you all sorts of stuff to get there. And this is the spontaneous thing that happens for us at a dinner party. When we're writing, all of a sudden it's more protracted and drawn out, and we're looking in and everything, and sometimes we can lose sight of that landing point. And yet somehow in your work, at some point in the process, because here's what I'm hearing you say, you're saying you're in a mystery, you're swimming in this mystery throughout, you're centering, you know, around, circling for that unsayable thing, but ultimately your stories are taking shape. And I'm also hearing you curiously say that it feels to you elusive throughout the entire process.
Right. And I know that's not true for all writers or all artists, that often people can lay out a structure or an outline. And I admire that, you know, and I think if I were a different, you know, if I were more skilled in a certain way, like what's the structure of a pilot, or what's the structure really of a 3-act screenplay. And I've tried to look at that a little bit, and, you know, but it's just, personally speaking, it's not where my brain or soul goes. What I find is that the structure is organic, ultimately it turns out to be organic to the thing which is being searched for. That I can't plan it. But what I will say in terms of the rigor, discipline, and skill of it is that it's by dint of engaging day by day, even for 15 minutes or an hour or 2 hours when I'm in the middle of a project, that literally it is the subconscious will guide, even without you knowing it.
Yeah.
That you're writing this part of the story, and then you're writing that part, and you don't know how they go together, but that when I met those gorillas, this is what happened in my gut. And I remember seeing this, or, you know, you have these different, but then it goes back to, you know, but when I was a kid, the first animal when I was 3 years old, what does that have to do with it? I don't know, but that's coming up in my subconscious. Go for it, get it down. Days pass. In my case, with the tricky part, almost 7 years for the book and the play. All the Rage may be more like 4 or 5 years, but it's, you know, so slow. Obviously, that's my process. But literally, subconsciously, one day, you know, it's like a portal. There's these little portals open up. There's a door, and it just energetically, you walk through the door.
Yeah.
And that is how over a great period of time, the pieces that I made evolved.
Yeah.
That if I had, if I were asked to be in a writer's room, I know it would be a different experience. And part of me would love to learn that skill in a way, but it's just not where my soul goes. But yes, you're right. It's over a period of time, and it is ever the mystery, but there is an energetic, it's so in the body. It's literally like a humming feeling in the body. You go, oh yeah, that's God, that's got energy.
Yeah.
That door, but it speaks to you. And it's like if you sit down in the chair and you release yourself from the responsibility that I must make meaning,
Yeah.
but rather my job is to be available for what's asking to come through.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is the trying to calm my ego, that Marty Moran must make meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And that what happens instead is that you put yourself in the position to be vessel. And
Yeah.
I know that everyone who's listening, who's a writer, knows that you sit down, you think, I'm going to write this, and you start and it leads you somewhere else. Well, what is that that's leading you?
Yeah.
That's the mystery. But
Yeah.
to trust it, there's a skill in learning to feel it and trust it. And it comes from playing and engaging with it often.
I think there's an interaction too between the subconscious and the conscious mind. In other words, something might start in the subconscious and it kind of bubbles its way into the conscious.
Yeah.
And then what happens is some of our skill sets reside in our conscious mind. And so we recognize like, oh, that's a joke.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, that's funny.
And it's funny because it's really true.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Not because I'm trying to be funny,
Yeah.
but or that, oh God, that's a nice spicy bit. It's good to be funny here because my God, I've been talking about my suicide for the last 5 minutes.
Yeah,
and I want something funny.
And it also interacts with our physical selves. We get that, oh, if I do this, I'm a performer, I've been acting for a while, and I know that if I do this kind of thing, it has this kind of effect. Gee, that seems like a good coupling between this thing that's coming up from me in my writing and these skills that I have. And so it's sort of what starts in the unconscious finds its way through to the conscious. And I think the crafting happens largely in the conscious realm. I think.
I agree. I love that. And it makes me think to say this, that there's a really interesting relationship between the quiet solitude of writing and the part of you that's a ham, that's like, I'm an actor. I love to perform. I love to connect with people. And those energies existing in your own being are a wonderful alchemy. And being, that there's a time for being really quiet at the desk and crafting sentences and enjoying language. And there's also the time that you're like up in front of people and you're just like, energetically, you're like, I want to tell a damn good story. I don't want people to get bored. And the skill set, as you say, the conscious skill set of being an actor is, it's a beautiful interplay of honoring your deepest personal narratives and the part of you that knows how to tell a good yarn.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. One other question before we have the Q&A for me, and then also Lee is here, and she has a question or two as well. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about when we've worked together. There are certain sort of things that come up in terms of our interaction as director performer and performing techniques and just exercises that we might do that are not like acting class exercises, but they're actually things to do to help develop a performance and everything. And I'm wondering, has that had any effect in when you've gone out in the world as a performer? And if so, how? And how does it, in the quote unquote real world, how do these things show up? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of elements to that, but there's one, I would say, huge one that I want to try to share concisely, which is that over all the many months and years that we worked together, there was a way in which you so often said to me, the story is enough and you are enough. In a way, you were saying that just talk. Just be right here. Hello. Hi, I'm Marty. And, here's the story. Like you do with Mike and like you do. And I did an entire run in New York for 11 weeks, 8 shows a week. I toured to Denver and San Jose with the show. And I had, and it went well. And I had all, but it was literally really like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years into doing the tricky part, where one night I can remember in Washington, D.C., at the Signature Theater, and I thought, oh, this is what Seth means. And I felt it for a minute. He's like, you don't have to perform, but it's so ingrained, and I'm all my fear and my, that's it. And even then I felt it. And then it's taken a lot of practice to where I think for the most part, I can mostly walk out, and no matter what's happening, like I have a headache, or, oh my God, Ben Brantley's there tonight, or my God, and I'm full of nerves and fear. What the hell? Just here I am. And here's the story, and I'm going to speak. That there's something about the profound trust in presence, which is, I found elusive for years. And I still, my God, we meditate, we do, what is it to really be, to trust the now?
Yeah.
And that's been a lifelong. And so just to say that I felt that bleed wonderfully into my other work, where auditioning, where, playing other parts, where that practice of a kind of comfortability and trust in the breathing, living existence of, being here in the room, right where I am. I spent years doing the Uta Hagen, and I loved it all, like, what am I smelling, and what room is this really? And that chair was my grandmother's chair, and all that stuff had imaginative fuel in a way. But the thing that transcended them all was just understanding what it is to walk and be where your feet are. Walk in and just be there and say the words and just look at the person across from you or the audience. So that's my way of going on about, my God, it's so simple, and that simple thing was years in the making, and it changed things for me.
It's interesting, one of the definitions of the word perform, of course, has nothing to do with showbiz. It's just like performing a task, as in doing something.
Doing.
And I think if we or as we sort of look at that word in a different way, the expectations alter, that maybe we're not responsible so much for putting on a show, but we agree to be there and do stuff, and that's the show. And
yeah.
people, people,
and that's radical in a way. Well, it is.
It's so funny because, like, to me, it's not radical even remotely, because of all the things I was exposed to when I was, of course, training, and as I continually train. So it's certainly not invented by anything through me or the Barrow Group or Lee or anything like that. But
it felt radical to this, conservative trained, whatever, overachieving Irish Catholic screwed up, wonderful, whatever.
Lee, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Well, Marty is, I know we could just listen to Marty talk for hours and hours. You're so extraordinary, and you are so eloquent and have such a way with words. But also Marty is an amazing performer, because he also sings and dances, and he's like a quadruple threat. And you're working on a show right now, right, which was canceled, and you were talking about that they're rehearsing it, and you're going to do that on Zoom, right?
Well, a kind of live stream version of it. We're still working it out as a fundraiser for healthcare workers. It's an ongoing process, the technical stuff, all these different applications, and everyone performing from their rooms. So, a couple people are in Ireland, and a couple people in London and Michigan and Boston, and I'm in my little room in New York. So it's technically been daunting, and I'm not sure exactly what it will ultimately be, but we're in the middle of it. We have a few more days of rehearsing and putting it together so that it can make a cohesive sense. But it's a piece called Sing Street, and it's a wonderful musical about an Irish Catholic school in Dublin, Ireland in the early 80s. So yeah, that's happening right now. And if you look for it toward the end of the month or beginning of May, that they're still figuring out the dates with Facebook Live or all this kind of, but I think it'll be fun. There won't be a lot of me because I play the mean, physically abusive principal, and I think they're going to highlight mostly the music and the joy of it. But anyway, but it's lovely. It's
well,
really,
in these viral times, it's always nice to
I
visit.
know you just don't want to see the guy slapping around the kids during the pandemic. I think, right? We'll just give it a break.
Oh yeah. So at this point, I think we can open this up for questions. And if anybody has a question, please feel free to, as I said before, to raise your hand technically, and I will keep an eye on that. And while we're waiting for things to come in, we can ask other questions. Lee, you said you had a question about faith.
Right. So, Marty and I, one of my favorite topics is to talk about faith, or one of the questions I throw out to my students all the time is what inspires you or what keeps you inspired. And just even that subject of faith right now, I think a lot of people are, looking at that. But what's your practice in your faith, Martin? Or what does that mean to you? I throw that out when I, throw that out. What is that?
Yeah. Well, you speak about it a lot too. I mean, Lee, clearly you do. It really, it's so much comes down to sometimes, really where you're dancing wildly between fear and if we're going to say faith, but if I were to say faith is a sense of resting in all is well, no matter what's happening.
Yeah.
I have a preference that there was an epidemic. I have a preference that I was not unemployed. I have a preference, but what is happening is happening. And that practice of having faith in this very moment, it just comes down to that all the time, including that, oh my God, I think I have a cough. Oh, do I have okay, breathe, faith, trust. It's what's happening. I think everyone really probably knows what I'm referring to. It's such an ongoing moment to moment practice.
Right. It's a practice, as you said, a practice. And practice just letting those kind of really, really dark thoughts come in. And when those dark thoughts come in, how do you replace it with a positive one? But terrific. I think Benjamin has a question. So great. So yeah, Benjamin. So Porter will unmute you and
and Benjamin, feel free to turn on your camera for a second so we can all see you.
Really nice to see you. Hi, Benjamin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Question is, I've started writing recently, and I just want to know, how do you maintain your original artistic vision when you go through the editing process, or does that change within itself?
So when you ask that, Benjamin, do you mean your own personal editing process, or when you're getting feedback from others?
I guess both.
Yeah.
I would say right now I'm at the part where I'm starting to get feedback. So that personally would be part of that question.
Yeah. Well, it's a great ongoing question. And I had just, and you'll discover your own ways, but just a few things that come to mind. Sure. First and foremost, I would say for me anyway, bottom line, writing, and I'm sure you've heard this before, writing is rewriting.
Okay.
For me, writing is drafts and piles of words and other piles of words and that pile of words, and this is in ink and that's on the computer and it's like material that I'm essentially always editing. That every time I look at it again, a different impulse arises, or I say, I don't need that word, or let's just take all the adverbs out and that'll be cleaner. Or that you're going to be in a different state the next day when you look at it and you're editing. And I think it's just energetically in that moment, again, trusting that your whatever that deepest impulse is guiding you to deepen and clarify your meaning. Because, Joan Didion used to say, look, I write to find out what I think, really. I write that you write a sentence and you think, oh, this is what, and then you look at it the next day and you go, no, that's not clear. That's not what I mean. And you edit it and you say, this is a stronger word. And I can say this in 5 less words. And it'll be much clearer for my listener or for my reader. And it's an ongoing, every writer I know says that you're editing. Walt Whitman edited Leaves of Grass for 22 years. Every time he looked at Leaves of Grass, he re-edited it. It's, and it's because he kept deepening it. And you'll find different versions of Leaves of Grass, that's one thing I would just say, just trust that actually your own editing is a part of the organic ongoing process of writing. It's just writing is rewriting. When you're getting feedback from others, my experience has been that as you just keep breathing into your belly, when people are responding or they write, breathe deep into your belly, and that you will find, I think most of the time, that within a day or 2 or 3, the things that really mean something to you in your vision and your artistic, you will find that somehow they went in and landed somewhere in your belly. And that most of what's said, or a lot of what's said, unless they're really somebody you really meld with, will just bounce off. And that's okay. And it literally just, I used to get an image of that when Seth and I were at Sundance, because we got feedback from all these amazing people. And you'd think, oh my God, that's Marsha Mason or Marsha Norman, and I should listen to everything she says, or Moises Kaufman, and they're all amazing people. But you'd say, oh, I realized later that really went in, and that means something to me. But what does it mean really? And that most of the other stuff bounced off, and that's fine. Just let it off, let it go, because your deepest subconscious guide is guiding you, and just know that and reaffirm that all the time.
There's also, I believe, a trial and error aspect to this, that we get a note from somebody, it may speak to us, we kind of go, oh, I need to do that, and we incorporate it in some way, and we play with it for a while. It might come into our writing and our performing, and then sometimes what will happen is after you play with it for a while, that thing that at first was so interesting to you, you have a different relationship with it, and you go like, actually, this is not a good thing. I don't
really mean, yeah. Yeah, that happens deeply. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, Benjamin.
Wonderful question, and I hope it's helpful.
Thanks so much. I see that Candace has a question, so Candace, go ahead and you can. Yeah, there your camera. There you are. Yeah. Benjamin, you can turn off your video just for a sec, and thank you. And so, Candace, what's your question?
Well, I'm so struck by which I've found to be very true about the huge process of how long it takes and the work required just to create this thing, and the writing and the rewriting and the revisioning and the new impulses and all of that. And I imagine that the tricky part took you a long time, and you were with it a long time. And my question is, how did it come about that you decided to write the next one? How did the impulse, how did you know you were ready, or how did that work for you, that the next one was begging to be born?
And Candace, do you mean that in terms of knowing I was finished with the first one, or literally like how did the next one arise? Like,
I think I want both answers if you
I don't know why, because I was thinking, because I know I'm familiar with some of what you're writing, and it's very, very deep and it's very profound, and it makes me think of one thing, that is that there's a great poet, Stanley Kunitz, and he often would talk about how another part of writing, deep kind of writing, is that you must find a way to take time and bring it into yourself and formulate it to your own temperament and formulate it to your own writing. In other words, time and writing are an interesting thing, that's something that's really being asked to be manifest in the world. To really know that you're being rigorous, but honor that it will take the time it takes. And that you may really I always had a schedule. By next March, it's going to be done. but then it's something, it keeps, oh, you're like, oh my God, doors keep opening. And that can go on for a while until there is a kind of closure. And you can say, you know, okay, so that was years for me with Tricky Part, it really was. The next thing happened similarly, that a question again took root in a way that it was, you know, both enlivening and also a fucking pain in the, I'm not supposed to.
No, you can say that's fine.
Oh, really a pain because I thought, oh God, here's this question. And the question was about anger in this case. And the question of like, I'm not done with exploring this whole notion of humanity about anger and forgiveness. And so another aspect of my inquiry arose and took hold. And I didn't want it to really, but I also did, because it's the, you know, the agony and the ecstasy of being a writer, being an artist, that, you know, you want to be left alone sometimes, and, you know, you take your time. But what happened for me, Candace, was that another question took hold, and it actually arose out of the experience of doing the Tricky Part. And that question then became urgent, imperative to try to figure out my relation. What is anger, and my relationship with anger.
Just to bring everybody up to speed on that, because some people are not familiar with the material, you wrote the Tricky Part, you put it out in the world, you were starting to get a lot of response from people, along with all the kudos, and boy, this is so deep and powerful and everything. There were a lot of people that would say, and I was witness to this so many times, people would say like, why aren't you angry? Where's your anger? What's going on? And that became a catalyst for this search. Am I getting that right? Is that how that happened?
Yeah. So but it was, again, it was a gut feeling. Did that answer it partly? A bit, Candace? Did you mute? She's saying yeah. Muted. Okay. You muted, but thanks.
Am I muted? Yes, thank you. That's great.
Good. And I hope your work in writing is going well in its time, you know?
Yeah.
And to all of you here, because let's just face it too, we're in an incredibly particular moment in human evolution where not just being a writer or an artist, but just being a conscious human being is a big job.
Yeah.
I feel like that's I'm not really writing right now because but other people I know really are, but I'm really just practicing sort of, I don't know what I'm practicing. I'm practicing like trying to be aware of a moment on the planet unparalleled, unprecedented, as we keep saying, but truly deeply like our species has never been here. And it's so kind of a privilege to be alive and fearful. And there's faith again that somehow we're part perhaps of a forward movement, of an awakening. I like to think that, but that may be me placing meaning on it. But to be aware of the quietude, to be aware of the machinery has stopped in a certain way. It's, as somebody said the other day, it's like Mother Nature gave us all a timeout and said, go to your room and think about what you've done.
Yeah. All right, Candace, thank you so much for that question. We have time for one more question. I see Jerry has a question. So Jerry, you're on. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. Mr. Moran, may I call you that?
Of course, Jerry, anything you like. I feel very honored to be called Mr. Moran.
You said in a couple of different ways that the brain has a narrative engine. And I remember reading some research about memory, which said that it typically was organized in story form, so that you didn't, one didn't call up bits, but rather a collection of bits that made up a little story. Is that related to anything that you said?
I think so, Jerry, in a very deep way. You know Oliver Sacks? Do you remember that wonderful doctor?
I read his stuff.
And his latest book, which I keep meaning to get, but I've read parts of it, is called River of Consciousness. And he speaks a lot about memory in that book, and I've read some of the sections about memory. But essentially, he's saying that it's impossible for us to actually have an absolute factual memory, because it's sifted through that narrative structure of the sapient brain. But that what's happening is that those bits you're talking about, of weaving them together, is our species, perhaps we could say our species' desire to create narrative, to connect, because essentially, right, we're not separate. I mean, it's an illusion that we're separate, but that desire to connect and find meaning, to find that river of consciousness that is all of us as one, like they say the mushrooms and fungi are, and like the trees and the roots, that our brains, our beings are wired to remind us of this mystery of being in existence.
You sound like Joseph Campbell.
That's so beautiful. I know.
But
Jerry,
I feel like, well, thanks, Lee. But I felt like maybe in a way I felt inspired by Jerry, because I felt like, is that Jerry there was something I was getting from you where I felt like that was what you were. you helped me feel that or think of that. Do you know what?
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
All right. Well, very good. So, thank you, Jerry. So, believe it or not, everybody, our time has flown through, and we're going to be saying a goodbye to you. But I'm wondering if really quickly you all could just turn on your cameras, just so we can. Speaking of all this connection, we can just see you all, see each other.
And then gallery or whatever.
Look at these faces.
All these beautiful, beautiful faces. Oh, wow. So beautiful. So beautiful. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
So,
be safe and well.
Yes. So, Marty, I just wanted to thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing some of your thoughts and wisdom. And I, of course, want to thank all of you out there for participating in this session. And this is a weekly event for us. Every Wednesday at 5 p.m. we are interviewing artists, and just so grateful to see you all. And we'll see you next week, if not before. We have other online programming that is free and that we're keeping going during these times. And you can go to barrowgroup.org to discover that. And I think without any further ado, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. So thanks so much for joining us.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Be well.
Be well, be well, be well.
Bye.